Hallo und herzlich willkommen zur allerersten Folge von Handelsblatt Invest, dem Podcast für Profi-Investoren und ambitionierte Privatanleger. Ich bin Astrid Dörner. Nach 16 Jahren als Handelsblatt-Reporterin an der Wall Street starte ich jetzt als Finanzkorrespondentin in Frankfurt. Und ich freue mich wirklich sehr, Sie bei meinem neuen Podcast zu begrüßen. Hier sprechen wir immer mittwochs über die wichtigsten Themen, die die Kapitalmärkte bewegen und was das für Ihre Investmententscheidung bedeutet. Die erste Folge ist kostenlos, damit Sie testen können, ob Ihnen der Podcast auch gefällt. Alle weiteren Folgen können Sie dann mit einem digitalen Handelsblatt-Abo hören. Abonnieren Sie unseren Invest-Kanal auf den Podcast-Plattformen Ihrer Wahl, um keine Folge zu verpassen. Und weil das hier für uns alle neu ist, möchte ich Ihnen zunächst mal einen kleinen Überblick geben, wie unsere Invest-Folgen aufgebaut sind. Wir haben 2 Rubriken, den Deep Dive und den Big Bet. Im Deep Dive wollen wir es genau wissen. Was treibt die Kurse von Aktien, Anleihen, Rohstoffen und Krypto wirklich? Welche große Markttrends verbergen sich hinter den Schlagzeilen? Und was wird morgen vielleicht schon überholt sein? Um zu verstehen, wie die Finanzmärkte wirklich ticken, holen wir im Deep Dive internationale Kapitalmarktexperten vor das Mikrofon, damit Sie erfahren, was die Finanzprofis schon wissen. Bei der Big Bet lehnen wir uns weit aus dem Fenster und polieren die Glaskugel, wenn Sie so wollen. Hier gibt es jede Woche eine ganz konkrete Kursprognose zu einem Asset. Das kann eine Einzelaktie sein, ein Edelmetall oder auch ein Index. Mal ist das mit fundamentalen Kennzahlen unterlegt und mal mit charttechnischen Signalen. Und yes, wir haben jede Menge zu besprechen. In unserem ersten Deep Dive gibt es heute ein Interview mit Ed Yardeni. Er ist einer der renommiertesten Kapitalmarktexperten in New York. Und mit seinem Analysehauses Yardeni Research gehört er zu den größten Bullen an der Wall Street. Lange hat er damit recht behalten. Aber angesichts der derzeitigen Turbulenzen sprechen wir darüber, wie viel Potenzial noch in US-Aktien steckt und wo sich der Einstieg vielleicht auch jetzt noch lohnt. Und danach stelle ich Ihnen meinen geschätzten Kollegen Markus Hinterberger vor. Denn ich mache das hier nicht ganz alleine. Markus ist Finanzkorrespondent in München und er übernimmt bei Handelsblatt Invest die Rolle des Special Hosts. Damit Sie ihn gleich besser kennenlernen, übernimmt er heute die Rubrik Big Bet. Er spricht mit Paul Jackson, Leiter der globalen Marktanalyse des Vermögensverwalters Invesco. Sie diskutieren über die Folgen der Yen-Rallye, die von Anlegern auf der ganzen Welt eng verfolgt werden. So, und jetzt, wo der Fahrplan klar ist, geht es los mit unserem Interview mit Ed Yardeni. Ed, welcome. It's really terrific to have you on as my first guest.
Thank you very much.
Now, Ed, I remember when we talked in August 2020, so a while ago, in the middle of the pandemic, you talked to me about your Roaring 2020 scenario. So a very positive setup for US stocks that could last throughout the decade. And at the time, I thought, well, maybe he is a little too optimistic here. But so far, you've been
Delusional,
right.
maybe.
Yeah, now that you say that, yes. But now that we're kind of halfway through, how are things looking? Are you sticking to the Roaring 2020 scenario?
Yes, it's worked pretty well, quite well. We're 6 years into the Roaring 2020s. We got 4 more years to the end of 2029, and real GDP is at an all-time record high. Consumption is at an all-time record high. Corporate earnings, all-time record high, and the stock market at an all-time record high. I'd say from an economic and financial standpoint, it has been the Roaring 2020s, and it was all kind of premised on my view that the economy would prove to be remarkably resilient. And Esther, if you think of all the shocks that we've had since 2020, the pandemic, the lockdown, the supply chain disruptions, inflation, the Fed tightening, tariffs. And yet, despite all that, there was only one recession. And it only lasted 2 months. And really, the last recession, or last true recession, was 2008, 2009.
And looking at the stock market right now, with all the things that have been going on around this year, right? What areas do you like best right now in the US stock market?
Well, I had been recommending overweighting technology and communication services. At the end of last year, I went to market weight on those two because the two in the S&P 500 account now for 45% of the market value, the market capitalization of the S&P 500. And I just found it uncomfortable to be recommending overweighting 2 sectors that were already had succeeded so well. And I also felt that it was time to actually underweight the Magnificent Seven because they were increasingly competing with each other. It's kind of like a Game of Thrones situation where 7 kingdoms lived quietly next to each other and had their own monopolies that kept them prosperous. But then with AI, they started to compete and have to spend a lot more money. And there's basically been an AI arms race. So I'm underweighting Magnificent Seven. On the other hand, I remain a believer in the financials. I think overweighting the financials makes sense, and maybe the smaller cap financials, the regional banks, because there'll be more, because there is more deregulation and probably more mergers and acquisitions. I remain overweight in industrials, particularly defense, for obvious reasons. It's a very unsettled and unsettling geopolitical environment we live in. But the transportation stocks are starting to act quite well, anticipating that the economy will continue to do very well this year. What's new is I went from underweight to overweight healthcare, particularly biotechnology. And again, we see the pharmaceutical companies having to fill up their pipelines, and so there's a lot of acquisitions going on of biotechnology companies. That's kind of it in terms of the big sectors. The really tiny sector is materials. In a broad perspective, I have been recommending overweighting gold. Benefit of hindsight, I should have said overweight precious metals and base metals and rare earth metals, and I would do that as well.
And you were spot on gold too, in hindsight.
Gold worked out remarkably well.
Is it still time to buy gold, or are we now, and silver, or would you stay away from that?
Well, I confess I am no expert on gold or the other precious metals. They are commodities, and commodity people tend to know a lot more about supply and demand. And in the past, I've never had an opinion on gold because as a strategist, I have nothing to value it with. I don't have any interest coupons income. I don't have any dividends. The miners have it, so you could maybe do an analysis of the miners. But gold itself, I can't value. But when it rose above $2,000 an ounce in 2024, I looked at the charts and I said, it's a new record high, and clearly related to central banks buying gold after Russia invaded Ukraine. So I thought that was a pretty easy call. I said, just based on geopolitics, I like gold. And then when it crossed to 3,000 at the beginning of 2025, I said, I think it's going to go to 4,000 by the end of 2025, which looked delusional as well back then. But actually, we got to 4,500. I wasn't bullish enough. And when we crossed above 4,000 at the end of last year, I raised my target for this year from 5,000 to 6,000. Obviously, I'm glad I did. Now I'm wondering whether I need to raise it again for this year because we're already at 5,000. And I still am aiming for 10,000 by the end of the decade.
And maybe have to raise that as well, but we'll talk about that maybe some other time.
I do have one tool that has some fundamental relationship to as a way to price gold, and that is if you put the price of gold in dollars versus the S&P 500 exactly on the same scale, and right now the S&P 500 is, getting close to 7,000, and here gold is at 5,000, and could get to 6,000-7,000 in the next couple of years. But if you look at that chart, you see that gold is inversely related to stocks, so it's a great diversifier to have a balanced portfolio. But it also has about the same trend as the S&P 500, and I believe the S&P 500 is going to get to 10,000 by the end of the decade. On market anticipating $500 per share earnings for the S&P 500 in 2030. So in 2029, the market will be anticipating $500 a share for 2030. Put a 20 multiple on that, you get 10,000. And so if the stock market goes to 10,000, I think people will get increasingly nervous about it because they'll be making so much money, and diversify, rebalance into gold and maybe some other assets.
Is that unusual that you have the risk-on asset stock at all-time high and rising, and gold, the risk-off asset, rising as well?
It's not unusual if you look at kind of the long-term trend. It is unusual on a kind of cyclical basis, on a four-year kind of cycle basis. They tend to be inversely correlated. but the trend tends to be the same. But, the reality is the data only goes back to the early 1970s when Richard Nixon closed the gold window. Prior to that, gold was fixed around $34 an ounce. So we don't really have that long a history of the price of gold when it's left in a free market. So there's no particular reason why it's not unusual in the sense that we don't have a lot of data to go by.
Interesting. Now, last week, we've seen another example of the taco trade, where markets got a little unsettled before President Trump made another U-turn on his Greenland strategy, which caused a relief rally. And so since then, there's kind of this debate in the market, I feel, about the meaning of the taco trade. What if investors have more and more confidence he will course correct and then not sell, and therefore maybe don't keep the president in check anymore? How do you look at that?
I mean, that's a clever way to look at the relationship between the stock market and the president. But the taco trade is what Trump always chickens out.
Right.
But does he really chicken out, or does he just take a super insane, hawkish, nuclear option attitude towards negotiation? Basically, when he negotiates, he walks into the room, and the first thing he says is that, I don't even know why I'm wasting my time here. You're not important to me at all. What are you going to do to make me feel better about you? It's a unique way of. So when he negotiates Greenland, he said, "I'm going to take it all, and if if I need to do a military, I'll think about it." And so he takes an extreme position, and everybody freaks out. And then negotiations occur in the next hour, and a framework is worked out, and the details to be determined. But it certainly wasn't a taco event when he bombed the nuclear facilities in Iran. It wasn't a taco event when he pulled Maduro out of Venezuela and declared that the Monroe Doctrine is back and that the Western Hemisphere basically is America's to rule one way or the other. And when he talks to Mark Carney of Canada, he calls him governor. So,
that's right.
He's a bully. He's a bully, but he's a bully that has some military power, some economic power to go with. The risk in this kind of approach is that the China, if the Monroe Doctrine is back with a Trump corollary, well, clearly there's a Putin Doctrine, which is Putin believes that all of Ukraine belongs to Russia. And that China believes that all of the South China Sea belongs to China, and as does Taiwan. So is he just asking for more geopolitical trouble, or are the other major countries that I just mentioned going to recognize that they're dealing with somebody who's got a lot of power behind him?
And you're saying markets in general can just watch and sit back and let that happen and not get distracted by all of that?
Yeah. Well, that's been the reality of it. I've looked at the history of the S&P 500 relative to geopolitical crises. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the stock market went down. But a few months later, it actually made a low because the United States bombed the Navy of Japan in Midway, and the market back well before the war was over anticipated that the U.S. would win, and the market actually bottomed back then. We've had a lot of geopolitical experiences where the reality is they've been buying opportunities, especially since World War II. And we just kind of saw that. We did have Russia invading Ukraine, and that was associated with a bear market, but for other reasons also. We had inflation, we had the Fed tightening. But right. Benefit of hindsight, that turned out to be an amazing buying opportunity. The Greenland threats last week were good for one day as a buying opportunity. So, the markets, I think, at the end of the day, the markets care about how these things have an impact on the U.S. economy. And when the markets last year recognized that, call it the taco trade. I guess that was the beginning of the taco trade, right, Astrid?
Liberation Day.
Liberation Day, and then a few days later we backed off, and the market went up 10% that day. And so the market immediately figured out, oh, this is the way Trump negotiates.
And then lastly, Ed, look at the risks for investors in the more near term. We have potentially more tariffs on Canadian goods. We have Iran risk, potentially, higher yields. What worries you, if anything?
You've got all that, and of course, there's a chance here that the U.S. government might shut down again. So there are definitely issues out there, but we're in the kind of the middle of the earnings season for the fourth quarter of last year, and it looks like earnings in the fourth quarter of last year soared to a all-time record high, and the outlook is pretty good for earnings this year. So if the economy and earnings could do as well as they did last year under those circumstances, I think they'll continue to do well under the similar circumstances we're facing up ahead here. But I do think the first half of the year may be a bit choppy because of some of the issues you're raising here. But I think by the end of the year, the market will get to about 7,700 on the S&P 500, and I think we'll see 10,000 by the end of the decade. And I think we'll still look back and call it the roaring 2020s. They've been roaring for the past 6 years, and I think 4 more years to go, where the market and the economy will continue to perform well.
And I feel with all the worries about the US and the role of the US and how this impacts the world order, that's a very refreshing take on the things that could actually go right this year and the next years to come. So thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you.
Und hier noch ein wichtiger Hinweis. Die Inhalte dieses Podcasts entsprechen keiner Anlageempfehlung, sondern dienen lediglich Ihrer Information. Wir übernehmen für mögliche Verluste keine Haftung und werden auch an möglichen Gewinnen nicht beteiligt. Und jetzt stelle ich Ihnen meinen geschätzten Kollegen Markus Hinterberger vor. Markus, du bist Chefreporter für Geldanlage und Märkte und du sitzt in München, da, wo das Geld sitzt.
Ja, genau. Also bei mir direkt ist es zwar nicht, also wenn ich hier so unter meinen Tisch schaue, aber du hast recht, in München ist sehr viel Geld zu Hause. Ich habe auch gestern wieder mit jemandem gesprochen, der meinte, es ist ja eigentlich die heimliche Finanzhauptstadt Deutschlands. Wobei natürlich alle großen Banken und Vermögensverwalter ihren Sitz in Frankfurt haben und das natürlich unbestrittenermaßen das Banken- und Finanzzentrum ist.
Und in München findest du dann bestimmt auch viel Inspiration für Themen, richtig?
Ja, da gibt's alles von bis, also natürlich auch die ganzen klassischen Themen, wie zum Beispiel die komplette Fondsbranche hat hier ihre Dependancen, natürlich alles Mögliche rund um ETFs. Es gibt natürlich auch viele Anbieter, die im Bereich Private Markets unterwegs sind.
Oh, sehr gutes Thema.
Ist ja sehr im Aufwind begriffen, aber es gibt natürlich auch so exotische Themen, wie zum Beispiel Kunst oder zum Beispiel auch, obwohl München eine Bierstadt ist, gibt es das Thema Weihnachtsinvestment auch. Da habe ich mich auch schon damit auseinandergesetzt und da gibt es auch Spannendes zu berichten.
Und damit, Markus, bist du ein ganz wunderbarer Special Host für Handelsblatt Invest und ich übergebe jetzt direkt an dich für unser Format Big Bet.
Genau, und für die Big Bet begrüße ich nun Paul Jackson, den obersten Marktanalysten beim Fondshaus Invesco. Er ist einer der wenigen Menschen in der Finanzbranche, die nicht nur Wirtschaft, sondern auch Philosophie studiert haben. Und genau das sorgt dafür, dass er oft einen ganz anderen und eigenen Blick auf die Märkte hat. Heute möchte ich von ihm wissen, wie er momentan auf Japan blickt. Good afternoon, Mr. Jackson. It's a pleasure to have you here in our podcast Handelsblatt Invest.
Good afternoon, Marcus. It's a real pleasure to join you.
Let's start directly with my first question. In Japan, there's currently a heated debate about supporting the yen, which has in the last years become a weak currency. What opportunities does this present for investors?
Well, you're absolutely right. The yen has become extremely weak because the Bank of Japan didn't tighten when everybody else did. So if the yen does appreciate from here, then I think that makes, for example, Japanese government bonds look attractive if you are not hedging the exposure. So at the moment, 30 or 40-year government Japanese bonds are offering 3.5% to 4% yields. And if you allow for an increase in the currency on top of that, then I think that would be a very attractive return.
And is this an attractive return for investors from the Eurozone as well?
Yes, I think the yen, although it will increase the most against the US dollar, I think it will also increase versus the euro. So I think there will still be currency gains for overseas investors from the Eurozone investing in Japan.
Now, I have learned when the bond market is high, this is not good for the stock market. And in the last year, the Nikkei index rose about over 30%. And quite a few investors have, in the beginning of the year, expected that the prices to continue rising. In my humble opinion, this is a bad news for everyone who holds Japanese stocks. Or are you here with me?
Yes, I agree to some extent. I do like Japanese stocks, but it is true that when the Japanese yen strengthens, that tends to dampen the return on Japanese equities. And we're talking here especially about those companies that earn money overseas. So Japanese companies exporting from Japan or making profits elsewhere and repatriating those profits. When expressed in yen, those profits will fall as the yen strengthens. So that tends to cause Japanese equities to underperform relative to other markets in those periods of yen strength. So you win on the currency, but you may give up some of that in terms of the equity market performance.
Okay. So if you think about investing in Japanese companies which earn their money in their home market, might this be an opportunity?
Yes, I think that is the way to go. We're at the moment look as though we're going to get quite a bit of fiscal stimulus coming through in Japan, which should help the domestic economy. So those domestically oriented companies that are not subject to the rise in the strength of the yen, I think they will perform better. And, I may think about sectors such as banks, for example, where the yield curve has steepened a lot. The bank sector, domestically oriented sector, I think could be a beneficiary, but certainly overall prefer domestic rather than overseas earners.
So thank you, Paul, for your insights in Japan. Und ich verabschiede mich nun auch hier an dieser Stelle und wünsche Ihnen allen gute Investments und bis zum nächsten Mal.
Vielen Dank auch von mir. Und damit sind wir am Ende von Handelsblatt Invest. Vielen Dank an das gesamte Podcast-Team für die Produktion der Folge und ganz besonders an meinen Kollegen Anis Miciewicz, ohne den es dieses Podcast-Projekt vermutlich nicht gegeben hätte. Wenn Ihnen diese allererste Folge gefallen hat, dann freuen wir uns sehr über eine Bewertung. Damit Sie die nächsten Folgen nicht verpassen, können Sie gerne auf Abonnieren drücken. Vielleicht haben Sie auch schon Themenvorschläge für uns oder einen ganz bestimmten Namen im Kopf, den ich mal einladen sollte? Dann schreiben Sie mir. Die Kontaktdaten finden Sie in den Shownotes. Nächsten Mittwoch melden wir uns wieder. Die Folge können Sie dann mit einem digitalen Handelsblatt-Abo hören. Damit haben Sie auch Zugriff auf viele exklusive Recherchen aus der Finanzwelt und praktische Ratgeber für die Geldanlage. Unser Angebot können Sie einen Monat lang für nur €1 testen. Mehr Infos finden Sie über den Link in den Shownotes. Bis dahin, bleiben Sie am Ball und einen Schritt voraus. Ihre Astrid Dörner.